Okay, very good afternoon to all the learners who are uh, in this session, who are attending in this session. 1 minute, give me. Now, today, we are going to talk on cultural diversity, how cultural diversity play an important role in bringing sustainability. And I interpret that in this word, the interwoven threads of sustainability. In last session, we have a quick look into the concept of human ecology. And if you look into the basic definition, we can tag it in a broader sense and it's synonymous to each other. But when we talk about cultural ecology, it is specific to the cultural context. So I'm going to touch upon on the concept of cultural ecology and different approaches to study the cultural ecology. All these you will get the details at our self-learning material. Okay. When we are trying to understand the approaches, you will find out three basic approaches of understanding the cultural ecology. One is environmental determinism, and the second is cultural determinism, and third is mutual interaction. When we in mutual interaction can be looked through two different approaches. One is ecosystem process, another is direct perception model. So that is what we define in our self-learning material, which you are available in our study material. Beyond that, what I want to discuss with all of you is how to look culture as the fourth pillar of sustainable development in this dynamic, to study in this dynamic society, nature-society interaction. So we can look into how culture and sustainable development is very important, what kind of relation it's having, then the role of having cultural diversity, a key to maintain sustainability. And we can look at cultural diversity, sustainable development, this relation from the point of globalization, modernization, and how to bring that in a positive sense. That's what we are going to look today. When we talk about the culture, what exactly the culture is? When we talk about this culture is the values. That's culture. We have certain values for each and every component, each every the belongingness you have. That's culture. Then it's behavior, your behavior pattern, and someone behavior pattern, human behavior pattern. That reflect the culture, right? Then, in fact, if you look in a simple way, that is the ways of life you are having. That's why we today in this modern world, what we say, the ways of life you depend that is Western culture. The ways of life they have, the values they use different, that is component. Different assets. The behavior they have. So in short, what we can say, culture is the ways of life, right? Then if you look, if we look into the academic context, literary point of view, we'll find out in the book Theory of Culture Science, the methodology of multilinear evolution, written by the anthropologist Julian Stewart in 1955, that he defined culture is the study of the adaptive processes by which the nature of society and the unpredictable number of features of culture are affected by the basic adjustment through which men utilize a given environment, Right. So when we are trying to understand human ecology, we know the human ecology, that the humanity which we survive in an environment, that is the way we adapt. In the same way, it's also process of adaptation. So if you look that this cultural ecology is the branch of ecology dealing with the interaction of human society and the natural environment, right? Again, we look into how to study the cultural ecology, the process. So it can be studied on the basis of that environment culture and on the basis of how environment culture interact. So that is And that process can be, one is environmental determinism, cultural determinism, and material interaction. When we talk about environmental determinism, environment directly or indirectly that influence the human to show your culture. For example, if you go to any of the different ecosystem, the different climatic zone, and then eco regions across the world, you will find out their culture, their tradition, their ways of life is different. It's because of that environment determines how you have to behave. Say, for example, if you look into the arid or semi-arid region, you'll find out that their food culture is totally different from that of the cold region. See, and their that food then clothes totally different. The festival they celebrate is totally different from that of the other region. So that is the environment that is determined by the environment, right? And coming into the cultural determinism, the beliefs of cultural determinism is that human behavior is influenced by cultural factor rather than biological factor. For example, you may be a person from different ecological region. For example, let us take an example. In our case, I'm from a Northeast India, right? My culture over there is very different. It is determined by the environment over there. But when I shifted here in that northern part of India, now I'm trying to adapt to this culture. And then my second generation, if I stay here, my children, they will adapt to this culture. So this culture determines that pattern. In that way, we can study the cultural ecology. Then coming to mutual interaction, when we are the first process to study to understand cultural ecology is the environmental determinism, and then another second the cultural determinism. But we know that culture, when we understand the culture has the output of the interaction between your environment and the human, right? So this human environment that relation is mutually interrelated, right? That's this kind of interrelation that linkages we already learned, and we are learning from the beginning when we are trying to understand the sustainability. So that also can be looked from two approaches. One is ecosystem process and direct perception approaches. When we talk about ecosystem process, the most important contribution is the promotion of a holistic nature of studying the interactional pattern between organism and its environment through exchange of material energy flow. This is the basic phenomenon of natural energy flow in ecological pyramid, right? So in that way, we can study the culture, right? Then another is direct perception model. When we talk about a perception, we consider the consideration of environment as perception and interpretation of constructed idea of culture by different social scientists that always create a gap in understanding of the concept as well as the relationship between environment and culture, or culture means, when we talk about the culture, in this case, activities by human, right? So there is no way where information can flow from real world to the perceived world, right? The point is that you can say, okay, when you look some phenomenon, before understanding that, you will feel that it may be going in this way. But when you really look into it, it may be in different way. So you cannot perceive the real world in, you cannot assume that perception in your, that real one into a ideological perception. So perception should be seen as different from interpretation. So people do not need to construct reality in order to perceive it. In fact, perception happens directly through once when you involve in that processes, only you will be able to perceive the thing. So, and perception, this is the creation of knowledge through action. It is how, for example, some culture like, agriculture. This is when you involve in the process of nature society interaction, different process of agricultural practices are introduced, right? So, and that the world has been perceived into, that is what exactly I mean when we are involved in, while we act on it. So direct perception model signifies an understanding of man-environment relationship through perception and interpretation. that is happen when you involve in. The best example is, as I told you, this is industrialization, agricultural activities. Then let us look into culture as the fourth pillar of culture is pillar of sustainable development, right? Central pillar of sustainable. And this in details we have learned in the first course also, and second course also we have some discussion on that. The basic principle of understanding culture as the pillar of sustainable development is, when we are trying to understand the sustainable development, it has three major pillars, basic pillars. They are, nature, society, and economic, right? When you look into these basic pillars and the interaction happen, that is because of the different culture, because of your identity, and the cultural identity, ecological condition are different from other places to another places. So when we are trying to understand the concept of sustainable development, then if you put the culture in the central focus, then that will be able to understand the sustainable development in a very easy way. In the one sense, if you are trying to bring sustainability of a system, then if you put the culture in the center of it, then it will have an easy implementation process, right? Then that's why culture should be viewed. Another point is when we are putting culture as the major pillars of sustainable development, it should not be viewed not just an additional pillar of sustainable development, along with what other pillars like social, economic, environmental. Because if you look into what is actually happening in nature society interaction, every people's identities, and then they have different significant systems, then the story, they have your different cosmologies, epistemic framework, that shapes how the environment is used and lived in. For example, Indian system of understanding the environment through our culture is different from that of the Western country. That's why we usually say that that Western lifestyle, that Western culture, that has direct impact into the environment. Environment means more environmental degradation. So culture shapes what we mean by development and determines how people act in the world. This is an example. Then let us have a look into the culture sustainable development linkages into two major points. One is how to look sustainable development through the lens of sustainable culture, and then how cultural diversity play an important role in managing or in bringing sustainability, or what I can say that the interwoven threats of sustainability. In that also, because all this different diversity of culture needs to have an intercultural dialogue. So let us have a look into that. And we'll find that different international discourses acknowledge that the place of cultural diversity in the achievement of sustainable development. As I told you that in India also we have diversity of culture is so much high in the same way. Even after British through colonization, even after they have destroyed our ecological system totally, in that case also we are one of the we have different hotspots of biodiversity because of our cultural diversity. We preserve something or other at different level, right? So that's why cultural diversity play an important role in managing or for achieving sustainable development. So that is well acknowledged in different documents like the Universal Declaration on Cultural Diversities we have that was happened 2001, that recognized cultural diversity is one of the roots of development and a means to achieve a more satisfactory intellectual, emotional, moral, and spiritual existence. So it is the central to culture is the central to sustainable development, and their people's values, as I told you, it is your culture is your values, and even that is worldviews, knowledge, and creativity that are inextricably linked to different culture, right? So sustainable development theory recognizes cultural diversity as a resource of innovation, human experience and knowledge exchange that can assist communities and society to move to the more sustainable futures. So it also acknowledges the importance, means that different international discourses acknowledge the importance of cultural diversity as a means to build a culture of peace, tolerance, non-violence, and human fulfillment, right? So different policies that truly engage with culture that should confront the double challenge that cultural diversity present. On the one hand, creative diversity needs to be promoted. It is central to people values, then heritage and expression. Thus, one of the key challenges of sustainable development is, what is that? Ensuring that culture retain their tradition and distinctiveness. So on the other hand, we know that it is vital to promote the peaceful coexistence of different culture in these pluralistic societies and acknowledge the principle of learning to live together for a more positive and sustainable future. So policies, whenever we frame policies, that should reflect this complexity characteristic, and it is also evident that relationship that exists between culture and sustainable developments are exactly accurate, and appreciate that the underlying dimension is culture or the fourth pillar of sustainable development. It is well acknowledged at the UN Johannesburg conference in 2002, means Rio +20. Then somewhere when we have cultural diversity in culture across the world, when culture reflected to your way of life, now when we have different ecological conditions, we have diversity in landform, diversity in environmental condition, so diversity in culture, there may be that agreement, disagreement between or among the culture. So we need to understand that. So there is a need to have an intercultural dialogue to bring sustainability. So the value of intercultural dialogue, what exactly that is in understanding and positive is to bring a positive change in social cultural processes, and is well acknowledged. So when you talk about cultural diversity, if you look into that, it is not exactly, not that there are different cultures that do not change. It is a process. The characteristic of societies nowadays change. For example, how we are coming from that agriculture to that horticulture to different activities in form of culture, industrialization. It shows culture. The culture itself is very dynamic. Therefore, there is a need to look into that. Cultural diversity cannot look, this is an unchanged, that is an unchanged stock. It is changing and it needs to be preserved, but it's setting for a continuous dialogue, means to have interaction between different cultural communities of different culture. Right? The basic critical component, critical component of sustainable development, it not only seeks to create peaceful coexistence between cultural communities, as we know, but also to recognize intercultural dialogue as a valuable means to define more sustainable visions for the future. Right. So intercultural dialogue contribute to sustainable development by facilitating knowledge action, means what you have to action, the tradition, local and scientific. For example, if you look into that belief system, the Western community, the Western society, and nowadays they're trying to adopt, trying to learn our Indian culture, looking into the sustainability point of view. For the simple example is they're looking towards vegetarian culture, right? So, so there is always a need for dialogue, because some cultures may be oriented towards some of the things which is not suitable for her. And sometimes you cannot insist in some environmental condition. For example, you have to take only the vegetarian food. And for others, for example, for some people who are staying in a another the cold area, right, in a cold desert, they need that non-vegetarian food. So this kind of understanding needs to have. Then how to look culture as a dimension of sustainability? As we know that the cultural threats boundaries that do not exist. If you look, they do not have, there is no physical clear boundary of culture. They are not visible. We know that physical boundary, there is nothing as it is, right? So they are the boundaries between your integration between a different community and exclusion, the own and the foreign, order, chaos, good and evil, right? When we talk about the culture, why it is having that, we say that these particular things, you are from other country, right? And we are, then others say that their system, their belief is bad, good. So it is about those things. So there is no physical boundary in exactly, there is no clear-cut boundary. So culture don't only define the boundary between social system and environment, they only control the communication and exchange between them. So it is a first good motive of considering. If you look into what is happening global crisis today, even today, what is happening in Russia, that Cold War, that war, all these can be looked as a cultural crisis to dominate to each other, right? So in a social system, culture can be into two main tasks. The one is a cognitive, communicative function in the subject, reality relationship. Two is a behavior and a project-oriented function in the subject-environment relationship, right? It clearly, whatever we discussed so far, that reflected of these two main tasks, right? Then let us try to look that globalization sustainability from the context of culture. In that, we can look into development process happening, then cultural diversity happening, colonialism, what has happened, modernization, again to the globalization impact. If you look into the self-reference development process here, you will find out that global crisis is crisis of modernization and of the globalization, right? Because one group of the nation, they want to implement their culture, the way they are having, the way they control the economy, right? So in this process of rationalization of the environment technologies, they play an important role, right? So the fundamental difference, if you look between the development models of globalization and sustainability, is the question of cultural diversity. Some of the modernization theory, cultural diversity in that their theory, cultural diversity is perceived in globalization very often as a perturbation factor of development, and it's a colorful folklore or as a cosmopolitan of restaurants mix. So instead of that, instead of in the sustainability, when we talk about a sustainability in modernization theory, that is about the perturbation factor of development, right? But in sustainability, the cultural diversity has an that existential and a protective meaning for the whole society. Therefore, when we have to speak out about the cultures of sustainability, not only the that cultural diversity, and we have to maintain and that sustainability of culture, and the culture we must try to preserve the cultural diversity, because we know that people are different, they live in different habitat, as I told you, we know across the world, our geographical features are different, and landform are different. In the same way, because of different environment conditions, that different social structure is there. So we need to have a globalized culture of sustainability. Then when we are looking for a globalized culture of sustainability, then that looks into a that can be interpreted as a culture of sustainability, right? That needs to bring to achieve the sustainability, right? The other that's I will not globalize take it. Then if you look into the evolutionary ability of natural system bases itself, we know that biological diversity is the evolutionary ability of social system that requires a cultural. The point is that in biological system, it evolved itself. If you look into from ecological succession, those from ecology, they will understand that ecological succession happened from a rock to a climax, that forest. In that way, culture also evolve in the processes through interaction, right? But the point here, when we talk about that culture, the process of culture, they can also influence the relation between social system and their socio-ecological environment in a positive, also in a negative way. See, whatever happening nowadays because of globalization is a cultural influence. That's why most of the social scientists is today also I mentioned about that global crisis can be looked into the cultural crisis. On the one hand, in colonialism, modernization, that happens that destruct the culture also. See the example of in India is I told you we know that because of the British when they come here, they destruct not only our environment, not only our resources, they looted our resources, they also destruct our culture, where our culture is pro-nature, right? So this is the simplest example of how colonialism and modernization are affecting to the diversity of culture. So in the same case, cultural diversity is possible only if there are boundaries between the culture that make them distinguishable. So it is important and necessary to explicitly integrate culture in sustainability discourse, as achieving sustainability goals essentially depend on human accounts, actions, and behavior, which are in turn culturally embedded. So let us have a look from the point of cultural diversity and sustainable development and that relation. As we know that, sorry, an important part of the culture side of sustainable development is cultural diversity, and cultural diversity is very much necessary for sustainable development because of two main reasons. One is human survival as a means of cultural existence. You survive, or and once and your identity is your culture, right? Your culture reflect your identity. What is your culture? Your belief system, culture, custom, tradition. So it is because of that, even in different region of the world, you will find in same at different level, you will find different culture also coexist together. So human survival is reflected by cultural existence. If the culture is lost, then you can say that individuality, your identity will not be exist. So we need to save our culture. The second reason is guarantee of security and the safeguarding of human rights for minority. For example, lack of mutual understanding between different countries, they cause war, conflict, and terrorism, right? Then, so to build and lead to development, it is so important to have mutual understanding, tolerance between different culture, right? So if people accept cultural diversity and understanding culture other than their own, it will contribute to the prevention of conflict, building of peace and development. That is how sustainable development, cultural diversity is very much important, right? So I'm not taking so much time because let us have a discussion, more on discussion. Okay, thank you. This is what I want to share with you, right? Rita, you can switch off the